Okay, you want to let people in, Silly? Thank you. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the second live session in the Nordic Climate Ambition Accelerator program, the advanced track. We will begin in a moment, but in the meantime, please change your name on Zoom. What we want to know is your name and your organization. It will then become much easier for us to allocate you into breakout rooms later on. So again, we will get started in a moment, but please change your name. All right. It is 1 minute past one for the Swedish, Danish, and Norwegian participants. I think it's 1 minute past two for the Finnish participants, and 11 o'clock, if I'm not mistaken, for the Icelandic participants. I did check my time zones before this. Welcome to this second workshop in the Climate Ambition Accelerator Advanced Track. We've been so excited for this session. We have 21 Holistic with us, and specifically Chendan and Paula, who will go through today's session, which is about SBTi, specifically near-term targets. And before I hand over the word to 21 Holistic, I just want to once again present the Nordic team. We have Karolina, Albert, Thomas, and I running the program together with Netta, Jonna, Solveig, Sille, and from Iceland. It's what's the correct pronunciation? Maybe Karo, you can help me. You did it so well this morning.
I'm also here, so I can.
Oh, right.
Hi, my name is Frisamt.
Frisamt.
Yes,
Thank you
thank
so
you.
much, and welcome to the Icelandic network. It's so great to have you, and thank you for letting us know the correct pronunciation. This is the Nordic team. I just want to remind everybody that you can always reach out to us if you have any questions about the program, and we will try to answer you as fast as possible. The agenda today is after I make a short introduction. Uh, we will give the word to 21 Holistic, and Chendan, who will walk us through some of the key SBTi themes. We will have a break in about 50 or 55 minutes. It is quite an intense topic, so I think we will all need a break in about a little less than an hour. And then we will continue some of the key SBTi themes and also answering some of your questions that you have posted in the online Excel sheet. Thank you so much for everyone who posted questions. There are some great questions among them, and we will address them before we go into breakout rooms. And in the breakout rooms today, we really want you to discuss how far you are in the SBTi process, and also if there are anything you have learned throughout taking these online courses and today's session that you want to discuss with participants. And then finally, some next steps, um, introducing some of the online modules ahead of the net zero session that we're doing specifically for this track. It's taking place on October the 9th of October, and it's going to be just as exciting as this session. I just want to remind you to please mute your microphone when you're not speaking, to keep your cameras on as much as possible. It is always nicer to see a lot of faces when we're in these webinars. And when you are in the breakout rooms, please coordinate any input you have if you are two spokesperson from one company. And then finally, we just want to remind you that these sessions take place under Chatham House rule. That means that you are free to discuss some of the to refer to any discussions from these sessions, but you can't ascribe them to any specific company or speaker. That also means that if some of you are making use of AI tools to either record or take notes from this meeting, we unfortunately can't accommodate that, so we will have to kick that AI bot out of the meeting, unfortunately. That's because we have this Chatham House rule. Once again, if you could please change your name on Zoom, it is very easy to do so. You can find an instruction on the slide right now. You just click on participants and find your name in the pop-up list, and you press more and then rename. And what we want to know is your name and which organization you are from, and that will make it much easier for us to allocate you into breakout rooms later. This is just a reminder that in that online Excel sheet where you also post your questions ahead of this session, you will always be able to find the full schedule. We are about halfway through the program, so we only have 2 sessions left in this advanced track. As I mentioned before, we will have a net zero session on October 9th, and then a final wrap-up session in November. I believe it's the 15th of November, if I'm not mistaken. But you can always refer to that. And if you are a bit confused, then please do reach out to us and we will help you out. Today's theme, as I mentioned, is SBTi, and with a specific focus on near-term targets. We just want to, first of all, make some make you aware of some important corrections to the SBTi online modules that you've been reviewing on the Academy. We're very sorry, but there are a couple of mistakes in those slides, and we just want to point them out right now before we continue the session. So we've pointed out 3 corrections specifically. One is the new SME criteria. You might have come across a couple of slides that that says that you, in order to qualify as an SME, you need to be below 500 employees. That criterion has changed. We have a bunch of criteria now. We won't go too much into it now because Chendan from 21 Holistic will also go through these criteria later on in the session. I also just want to remind you that if you want to keep updated with the latest sector guidance, we refer to the standards and guidance section on the SBTi website. You will always be able to see how far the SBTi are in developing these sector guidance. And so there is a couple of slides that are outdated, and that's because it's going so fast in the initiative. There are a lot of things changing all the time, so it's always best to keep you updated on the website. And finally, there is a reference to a target setting tool 2.0. The version is now called 2.3, but again, you will find that the latest version always in the resource library on the SBTi website. So once again, sorry about that, but I hope it will that this slide will make it easier for you to navigate. Also, we noticed that some of the slides have a bit of outdated information about the how well it's actually going for the SBTi. That's some very positive news. So I just took the liberty of creating a slide that sort of describes how well it's going. This screenshot that you can see on the right of the screen is from today. We are above 9,000 companies that are taking action, that have committed to the SBTi, and almost 3,500 of these companies have net zero commitments. So we're looking into exponential growth in the initiative still. And one particular stat from the latest SBTi monitoring report from last year says that companies with science-based targets or commitments increased from 37% to 39% of the global market cap. So that's quite a lot. So that is just to show you that the SBTi is here to stay. It is becoming the global standard for setting targets, climate targets. And just finally, a few words on how well it's going for the Nordic region. Today, Nordic companies companies make up about 10% of the total amount of SBTi committed companies globally. And currently about 940 companies within the Nordic region has committed to already set targets through the SBTi. And you can see a screenshot again from the monitoring report from last year, sort of describing this exponential growth that has been and still going on in the SBTi. And that's about it from me. I just want to hand over the word now to Chandan from 21 Holistic to walk us through some of these SBTi themes. And just to remind you, if you have any question, please feel free to make use of the Q&A function. If you have any comments to the slides, you can also use the chat function. And we will take questions continuously, but specifically after Chandan's presentation.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for the introduction. So hello, everybody. I saw that there are a lot of participants joining us today, so that's great. And thanks so much for sharing your questions beforehand. I know that many of you are considering to set targets, so really hoping to support you on that journey, because I understand there is a lot to navigate, even beyond the SBTi criteria. So just a quick word about myself. I'm a collaborator of 21 Holistic. I'm Chandan, and I have previously worked at the initiative myself, but now I'm in a more in-house ESG role, so I do understand the challenges that come with implementing science-based targets and get it approved internally at the company. And so the session today, we'll structure it as first, I will give you a more general recap of, the main documents, main updates to look out for at the SBTi, which could be useful for many of you as you're navigating this journey. And then I'll answer the questions that you've sent just one by one, but we have grouped them into more general themes. So I won't be addressing one specific question, but I will be addressing them in themes, which hopefully could help more of you. And then if time allows, we will have an open Q&A at the end. But I'm happy to also address questions that come up along the way. If you have some things that you wanna clarify, and I will try my best to help you. Also, my colleague Paula is here today, who could be great support. So yeah. Then let's kickstart. So first of all, important overview of the main SBTi standards. So these are the documents that you should go to when you're considering to submit your targets. So first, this is the near-term criteria, and the latest version is 5.2. So please always consult the latest version if possible. So this is if you're only considering to set near-term targets. So just use this criteria. And then the second one is the net zero criteria. And this one actually covers both the criteria for the near term and the net zero targets. So if you're considering to set both, you should use this one. And if you're a financial institution, of course, your targets will look quite different. And you should use this specific criteria designed for financial institutions. As Joachim has mentioned, there is a streamlined route for SME companies under certain eligibility criteria that the SBTi has designated that is in line with CSRD. So this could be relevant for you or for your suppliers. Sorry. Yes, so SBTi has been constantly making updates to the resources to make them more user-friendly and more coherent with each other. So there used to be a corporate manual. I have to say I feel a bit nostalgic because I worked on this manual, but this manual is now merged with the corporate net zero standard. But I find this very useful because this is the place you can go to find a lot of information about the target setting methodologies for scope 1, 2, and 3. So this is kind of like a storytelling of the criteria, if I might say so myself. And then the procedure for validation of SBTi targets. So this is really to give the maximum possible transparency of how the validators at the SBTi reviews your targets. So there have been some minor changes made in the near-term and net zero standards, some changes in the target setting tools as well. And the SBTi glossary, which is a very useful document if you wanted to understand, how does SBTi define a certain term. Some clarifications have been made to ensure that the standards is consistent, and there's also a new corporate target submission form for near-term and net zero targets. So this is the form that you will be filling out when you're submitting your targets. So there are also a range of documents that is about the validation process itself. So I mentioned before, there's one about the procedure. So basically outlining the various steps that company goes through when they get their targets validated. So you have a lot of assurance on, what's coming next, what should I prepare? And secondly, this is a criteria assessment indicator. So this is basically explains in a lot of detail about how each of the criterion is assessed. So if you want to be very sure that you're meeting all of the criteria, which is what guarantees the success of the validation, you can check out this document. And then lastly, I already mentioned there is an updated target submission form to use. And very importantly, this year, SBTi released a terms of reference to review its corporate net zero standard. So this terms of reference basically gives you, the scope of the revision. And so there are a few very important updates. So first of all, SBTi will align with the latest science. So this is the leading principle of the SBTi is to always align with the latest climate science and best practices. And then second one, I think a lot of companies are paying a lot of attention to this. So the challenges around Scope 3 target setting. So I will explain a bit more on this later, but SBTi is aware that as companies have been setting Scope 3 targets and trying to achieve those, they have been encountering some challenges, and the initiative really wants to help the companies address these challenges, and it has been reflecting on some of the possible revisions to the target setting approaches. And then better improvement of how to assess target achievement, including reviewing the use of environmental attribute certificates. So that include, RECs or carbon credits. And also to make sure that SBTi standards are interoperable with other standards. So you're all in the Nordic region, so probably many of you are subject to CSRD. So I think SBTi is also making sure that its standard is interoperable with the other regulations that many companies will be facing that are mandatory. But important to note that the final version of the standard is expected to be released in Q4 next year. So just until then, everything remains the same. And I want to say a few words about the Scope 3 updates. So you've probably heard a lot of news around this. But in September this year, so this is also in the context of the net zero standard update, SBTi released a few discussion papers, and there's one, first one I find very enjoyable to read, the Scope 3 discussion paper. So basically it discusses some of the challenges companies encounter when setting and reaching Scope 3 targets, and it explores a potential framework to be able to encourage and really better enable companies to focus on the most important emission sources, and proposes a few ideas for some more transition-specific alignment targets. So that means target based on metrics that are more actionable for companies. And also importantly, it rules out the use of carbon credits from outside of the value chain towards the emissions targets. So basically, SBTi stance on this topic has not changed. But what it is reflecting on is how to make the Scope 3 target setting approach more sensible for a company, considering the highly diverse sources of emissions and the kind of activities that are in Scope 3. And there's also a synthesis report that assessed the evidence that SBTi received in a call for evidence of the effectiveness of these EACs, basically summarizing that a lot of these carbon credits are not effective to be used as offsets. So this does not mean that these credits are not useful, but they're very unlikely to be useful in most cases to really offset that ton of emissions they promise to do. So I think these are very interesting ideas. And again, you should make sure you're updated with what SBTi is coming out with next year in the release of the updated net zero standard. So in relation to the carbon credit topic, I think SBTi's stance is that even though it's very strict with the use of carbon credits within your targets, it does encourage you to participate in what they call this beyond value chain mitigation. So basically, companies should be encouraged to support and finance climate-related activities to help the transition of net zero on a systematic level. So some companies, depending on their willingness and their capacity, and might want to contribute more to this climate transition than their value chain emissions alone. So SBTi has released these two reports. So one is basically summarizing what are some of the current barriers preventing companies to do this beyond value chain mitigation. And second, if you're a company interested in setting such a target or strategy, it also has some very helpful ideas around designing those. So here I have just gone through the main updates, and then in the next section, I will answer the questions that have been sent through. But is there any questions so far, or no, Joachim, if you want to make any comments?
No, I think it's great to just make everyone aware of these reports, and it just goes to show how many things are happening at the SBTi and the importance of staying updated. I don't think we have any questions so far.
Okay. I think it might feel that everything's very overwhelming and they're all separate, but actually I think they're pretty much there are a few important principles to keep in mind when you embark on this journey. And I think that's why, so for the first slide in this Q&A session, it's very important to give a recap on the near-term science-based targets and long-term science-based targets. So this chart, I think this chart really summarizes a lot of the most important principles of setting science-based targets. So first of all, you please so pay attention to the 4 elements on this chart. So you have the 1, 2, and 4. These are the required criteria. So basically, this is what SBTi focuses on, is climate change mitigation, emissions reduction within a company's value chain. And so starting from 1, so this is the near-term science-based target. So these are the 5 to 10-year targets from the time of target submission. So basically, why are they 5 to 10 years? Because this is how corporates are planning, right? Their strategy is in a shorter time frame, and you should be taking immediate actions as soon as possible to decarbonize your operations and your value chain. And you can see that the curve here of near-term target, it is on, it extends towards net zero. So basically, since the release of the net zero standard, the near-term target setting is also in line, largely in line with the ambition to get to net zero. So this is something to keep in mind. And then second is, the long-term science-based target. So basically to reach net zero, and you see that it gets to almost zero emissions, but so almost to, depending on your sector, so to the level of residual emissions. So you might have some emissions that are very difficult to reduce, but you have to reduce to that level And what SBTi requires is that you reduce 90% of your scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions. And we can talk more about that on the next slide. And then maybe first go to the fourth element here. So of course, so some companies will have residual emissions, but to get to that net stage, you have to neutralize these residual emissions through durable carbon removal. So this is where, carbon credits are used, is to neutralize these residual emissions. And then the third element, so I just covered it earlier, so that these are the beyond value chain mitigation. So basically, these are the recommended actions companies can take to help systematic transition to net zero. And these are only recommended and not required. So here are the important criteria for the near-term and long-term targets. So let's first start with the near-term ones. So for SBTi, the most important things to look at are the time frame, ambition, boundary, and methods. So basically, time frame is what is, how much time do I have to reach this target? And as I mentioned, for near term, it's 5 to 10 years. Ambition, so what is the ambition level that my target need to align to? So for scope 1 and 2, it's 1.5 degree. And for scope 3, it's well below 2 degrees. So what does it mean? So SBTi translate all of these climate pathways to exact percentage reduction that you can use to calculate your target ambition. There are also tools that you can use. And the boundary, so what does boundary mean? It means how much of my emissions do I need to cover in the target? So for scope 1 and 2, you must cover 95%. For scope 3, if your scope 3 emissions are more than 40% of total, you have to cover 67% of that. So basically, just remember, it's majority of your scope 3 emissions, 67% that need to be in the scope 3 target if your scope 3 emissions are more than 40%. And so there are a range of methodologies to use for scope 1 and 2 and 3. So I can quickly go through them here. So there's the absolute reduction. So basically reduce your emission on an absolute basis. So this is also one of the most common methods that companies use on scope 1 and 2. And there's a sector-specific intensity convergence. So these are, if you're in more the homogeneous sectors, if you produce cement, then you reduce your emissions based on like that physical ton of product output. And then you could also use renewable electricity target method. So this is basically to increase the renewable electricity in your scope 2. So this can be used instead of a emissions reduction target. And for scope 3, so there are also other methodologies to consider that provides a bit more flexibility. So there is the supplier and customer engagement target that we'll talk more about later. And there is the economic and physical intensity reduction. So you can reduce your scope 3 emissions based on economic unit, such as like value added, and physical intensity. So basically, per unit of product produced. And so for the long-term net zero target, the time frame is you have to reach that residual level of emissions by 2050, the latest. And the ambition, of course, if it's net zero, it has to be 1.5 degree aligned. So also for scope 3. And the coverage, so for scope 1 and 2, it's the same, 95%. But for scope 3, the coverage is 90%. So you can see that it is more than the near-term target boundary. So we have a question here. So what should we consider when updating near-term targets so that they would be compatible with a potential net zero commitment later on? So you see that the main difference here is really in the scope 3, right? So if you are considering to set net zero targets later on, you should consider to have a more ambitious scope 3 target and to cover more of your scope 3 emissions in the boundary so that you would be better prepared for that net zero target later. And And one most important difference in the methodologies allowed for the net zero target is that the supplier and customer engagement target methodology is not allowed there. So this is something to keep in mind. And we have this question about the use of biogas certificate as a reduction lever on scope 1. So unfortunately, this is not something that SBTi accepts. So there is the, of course, the market-based mechanisms in scope 2, via the use of renewable energy certificates. But for scope 1, that is not yet allowed. And
Before
here,
sorry, Chandan, maybe we could take a question before we move on. We have a question from Timmy, which is related to what you just talked about. Should one wait to set SBTs until we have some further guidance up on scope 3 target setting? And Timmy represents a business where over 90% of their emissions are in the supply chain.
I would not wait because I think it's important to get started, and there's a lot of, I understand there's a lot of effort needed to get that as targets approved, right? Like internally and externally. And as a business in the Nordic region, I think a lot of you might be subject to CSRD, where you have to disclose your 1.5 transition plan. And I think this is a very good way to fulfill that disclosure requirement as well. So I would start to just align yourself with the latest criteria and have your set targets set in place. And later, if the new guidance come out and you feel like you would like to update your targets, you can. But at least you would have gotten started on that journey, because it is something that would take some effort.
Yes, and even though there will be changes to the net zero standard, it's likely not going to be so substantial that you can't start now. So yeah, thank you, Chandan.
I saw a question on do you have to choose one of the methods, or can you mix them? So I think it's more common in scope 3 to mix the methods because, as I said earlier, a lot of the activities in your scope 3 is so diverse. So we often see companies set a supplier engagement target on their category 1 purchase goods and services, and they set maybe a emissions-based target on the other parts of emissions. In scope 1 and 2, I think it's more common that it is one target, so one absolute reduction target, or some companies might have like a scope 1 and 2 target plus a renewable electricity target. But it is something that is possible to do if you feel that it's more suitable for your business. All right. So on this slide, it's a more detailed table from this one. So it gives you like exact like the percentage reduction you have to reach. So for instance, a very important number is a 4.2%. Something you will come across a lot is the 1.5 degree ambition. So reduction of 4.2% every year on scope 1 and 2. So basically it gives you the exact figures you can use to establish your targets. And a very helpful resource for the question about how to update your near-term targets to be in line with net zero is also in the SBTi Getting Started guide. So on page 11, there's a specific page about how to get ready for net zero target validation. So basically, it asks you a few questions, and you give yes and no answers, and then you can see, okay, so what are the things that you should do to be prepared for net zero targets. So we have a specific question on the target timeframe. So if we submit our updated target in 2025, can our target year be 2030? And if our target year is 2030, does it mean that we need to reach the target by December 31st, 2029? So for targets submitted for validation in the first half of 2025, so that's until June 30th, your target years can be 2029 to 2034 inclusive. And if the target is submitted in the second half of 2025, so from July 1st onwards, the valid target years are between 2030 and 2031 inclusive. So yes, you can. And about the exact date to reach the target. So it depends on like your financial year, your calendar year. So what is the date like of your ending of your financial year? So if you submit your, let's see, if your target year is 2030, and you usually do your, financial account by the end of the year, yes, you can use the December 31st, 2029 as the endpoint. So basically, it should align with your company reporting, right? Because what SBTi requires is that you disclose your target progress and your scope 1 and 2, your inventory in your annual reporting. So you should align that with your annual reporting cycle. And this is also going to be important for the CSRD reporting because this is how company will be reporting their ESG data, including their emissions and scope 1 and 2 target, scope 3 target progress. Okay, so we have a question on so basically offices and what to include in the target. So there's head office and 7 rented offices, and scope 1 and 2 data from these rented offices is limited and uncertain. Can we rely on the data from only our head office, because that's where most of our sustainability objectives encompass this location? So it's important to go back to the concepts in the corporate standard. So you must include company-wide emissions based on the consolidation approach you've chosen. So what does it mean? What does consolidation approach mean? So there are different options. Is there equity share, or financial control, or operational control? So basically, you would choose one approach and then stick to that for your reporting and for your target setting. And you must include company-wide emissions. So this is also a very big difference that SBTi's requirement from more like other climate targets that preceded SBTi, is that you have to include all of your company's activities. And if the data from the rented offices is not great, you can use estimations, and you can try to improve that data qualities year on year, but you must include that in your baseline. Yeah, so there's a question on market-based versus location-based method. Can you choose which approach you use for the scope 2 target? So yes, you can choose either approach to set targets on scope 2, but you have to be consistent with that chosen approach for target tracking and reporting, which is quite straightforward, right? So, but it is best practice that you do report both your scope 2 emissions under both approaches. So you should report both the location-based and market-based emissions. And I believe this is also in line with what CSRD requires for the climate standard. All right.
Just to jump in, Chandan, because these are very, very good questions. The SBTi also has a checklist on their website, which is designed to prepare companies to set SBTs. So questions related to things from the greenhouse gas protocol, as you just mentioned, organizational boundary, and also the scope 2 question we just had. Just do you have everything in order to set SBTs? So we can send a link to that checklist. It's quite good.
Mm-hmm. Yes, so there are definitely a lot of resources that you could use, and I think what we do here is to point you to where to look because there's definitely a lot of information. Okay, so moving on to scope 3 target setting. So we have a few questions on the boundary itself. So one is in scope 3, the advice is to take into account only the material categories. Is this aligned with what SBTi requires? So there's an example given on the waste generated in office where the amount is small, data is not accurate. Do we need to, cover this kind of emission sources? So for now, the most important rule to remember is you have to cover 67% of your Scope 3 emissions. And within that, you should prioritize the more material emission sources. So the emission sources that are the highest, and also in the new Scope 3 discussion paper, SBTi proposed the idea of the most climate relevant categories. So I think this is also something to keep in mind, or there could be emission sources where there are locked-in emissions, that where the emissions and you're basically dependent on a certain kind of fossil fuel-based asset for years moving on. So if these are the emission sources, you should try to include them because they're most relevant, most material, most impactful for climate. So I would say that if waste is very small, it's not something you should prioritize in your target boundary. It's better to look at other categories. And then there is a question, so can you explain in simple terms, what does it mean, that companies must cover at least 67% of Scope 3 emissions in their target? Can you give an example? What does this mean in practice? If 70% of companies' emissions come from one category, can they focus on reducing that? Does it have an effect on how much the reduction should be? So if you have a category that is over 70% of your Scope 3 emissions, of course, you can set that only, target or targets covering that category of emissions because that has fulfilled the rule of 67%. And it does not really affect the reduction level. So because the methodologies are basically have the set, the matching reduction. So the boundary itself does not really affect the reduction ambition. Great. So we have a few questions on supplier and customer engagement. So first is if, on the customer engagement question, actually, it's very, very interesting one. If most significant part of emissions come from category 11, so use of sold products, what would you recommend? Is customer engagement the way? What if the end users from our sold products are actually the customers of our customers? Does it change anything in the sense of SBTi target setting? So it seems like a complex case of customers of customers. But you can indeed use customer engagement target to cover category 11. And the methodology and the logic is the same, quite the same as supplier engagement. But what matters is you have to have some kind of levers, right, to influence your customer. You could, what are some of the levers, and you have to basically be able to describe those in your submission so that SBTi is convinced that you do have some kind of possibility and ability to influence your customers to be able to achieve your target. So for instance, SBTi does not allow customer engagement targets for B2C activities because it's obviously individuals that cannot set science-based target themselves. Of course, we could, so this is something to keep in mind is, do you feel that you have that influence, you have that lever for your customers?
And by the way, the category 11, Chandan, that you're, which this relates to, we do get quite a lot of questions about that use phase emissions. For many companies, it make up a lot of their Scope 3 emissions. And earlier this year, we did do a white paper about use phase emissions and the different challenges that companies have to face. And it is extremely difficult sometimes to reduce that kind of emissions because it's out of the company's hands in many occasions, and that's also what this question relates to. To what extent can you actually influence your customers in order to cut emissions in the use phase? But anyway, we have a link to that white paper. We will present it later on and make sure that you get a link to it and you can review it if category 11 is important for your company.
Great, thank you. And then, so the next question is about supplier engagement. So this company's primary emissions are from scope 3 procurement of services. Can you set, a target on just a supplier engagement target on that? So yes, you can set just a supplier engagement target. So it is in no way sort of inferior to other target setting methods, but just to note that this is not accepted for net zero targets. And yeah, so if it does exceed the 67%, then you can set one supply engagement target to cover category 1. And here we have some examples of and some important things to keep in mind for supplier engagement targets. So basically, yes, so it's to engage a certain population of the suppliers or customers to have their own science-based targets. And here, SBTi is not, very strict on whether these are approved targets or not. So your suppliers can use SBTi guidance just to align themselves with the target criteria, but not necessarily, go through that validation process. And you see some example targets. So AstraZeneca, have commit to have 95% of their suppliers by spend covering purchased goods and services and capital goods, and 50% of its suppliers by spend covering upstream and transportation, distribution, and business travel to have science-based targets. So here you see the unit is spend. So because many companies might not be able to estimate the supplier emissions that yet. So in the beginning, many of them use spend as a proxy to cover the most material suppliers. However, now if you want to use spend, you do have to give an estimate of what you think this spend covers, because you still have to fulfill that 67% threshold. So this is something to keep in mind. And also these targets must be achieved within 5 years because they are short-term targets. You should be taking action very quickly. Yeah, so as I mentioned, if you express it as spend, you should still give an emissions estimate. Yeah, so they're only valid in near-term target settings, so not for net zero. And suppliers need to set targets that cover at minimum scope 1 and 2 emissions. So if you think that some of your suppliers might even cover scope 3, you could clarify that, with the SBTi when you submit your targets. And here's a very helpful guide on how to engage your suppliers and what are some of the ways to incentivize them, through the use of a scorecard or including supplier, sustainability in your procurement choices. So very actionable things to do on that. Yeah, so here I won't go into it more. It's more about the implementation. Yeah, so we also touched on it earlier. There is a new eligibility criteria for SMEs. So it is now aligned to CSRD. So you can see that there are some conditions to fulfill. But something to say is if you are SME that fall under this criteria, but you want to go through the full validation option, you can. So this is not obligatory to use the SMEs option. All right, let's see if there's been some questions. I don't think I saw any.
I don't think
Okay.
so, but maybe, Chenda, we could take 2 more questions and then we can have a break. And then
Yeah.
if it gives probably some time to also think about some questions that you may have for Chenda. Yeah.
Great. Yes, so we have some questions on, acquisition of new business in the future and rebaselining. So yeah, so this company is already aware that you will have to recalculate the baseline, so that's good. But is there anything else to consider? So I think for this, I speak from my personal experience. I think, you could consider if you have certain criteria when you acquire new business, like to be like, is this company, mature enough in terms of sustainability? Have they measured emissions? Have they set any targets? Obviously, if they have, it will make it much easier, for you to meet your science-based target, given that you do have to include them in your target now. And then it might be also helpful to have business that are in line in terms of sustainability, right? To be part of your company. And you could also, this is quite common in, I think, more like the investment world, you might establish some kind of 100-day plan for the new business to give them very actionable things to do. Like you need to, if they don't have emissions measurement, they should measure them. They should understand the SBTi criteria or things like that. So these are more practical things to consider. And I think one more technical consideration is what methodology you've chosen previously to set your target, because the choice of methodology sometimes does matter when you have a new acquisition. So here we show that if you have used the absolute contraction method, it is not sensitive to base year emissions. So if you re-baseline, basically you still have to apply the same, percentage reduction. But if you have chosen like a sector specific intensity convergence, but this is of course only relevant for a certain set of sectors, this might be more sensitive to the fact that you have a new acquisition in your baseline now, because you will be starting at a different intensity in the base year. So the time you need and the reduction you need to get to that convergence level in 2050 might change because of that acquisition. And this is something we didn't get a specific question on this, but I think important to note. So we covered, the case of inorganic growth. So with basically if there's acquisition, but there's also the case of organic growth. So basically, you just grow because you have more business, or you have you're opening up more offices, you have more production units. And in this case, it does not trigger re-baseline. So just something really to keep in mind, if you do have, opening up a new office, maybe because of the fact that you cannot re-baseline, these emissions are just added to your inventory, right? So maybe something to consider is to really have that criteria in mind when you're having new offices opening up due to organic growth. Okay, so I think we'll take a little break here.
Yes, thank you, Chendan, and that's such a good note to have with us with decoupling emissions from growth, and also, really be mindful that there are other opportunities in Scope 3 in terms of physical and economic intensity targets. That is where you can navigate growth in a different way than you can with the Scope 1 and 2 targets. But thank you. We will take a short break, everyone. If you have any questions for Chendan and 21 Holistic, please use the Q&A function. You can maybe spend a bit of the break if you if there's something you need to formulate. But we will be back here at 3 minutes past 2 or 3 if you're in Finland, or 12 if you're in Iceland. So see you in 10 minutes. Okay, we're back from the break. And once again, if you have any questions, now is the time to post them in the Q&A section. And please, Chendan, in the meantime, just please continue.
All right, ready for more?
Yeah, ready for more, always.
Great. So actually, we only have 2 themes left, from the received questions. So this is about the flag guidance. So the question is, does flag emissions have to be calculated separately according to the SBTi? Sorry, I have this answer already here, but Should there be a specific science-based target on flag emissions? Yes, so yes, the flag emissions have to be calculated separately because there used to be no flag GHG guide, but now a draft version is available. So all companies actually have to screen their inventory to see if you have any flag-related emissions. So if you have a lot of inputs from flag activities, especially, you should use the newly available land accounting guidance from GHGP to calculate your flag-related emissions. And then if your flag-related emissions are more than 20% of your total, you should also so you can look at this gray box here. You would be a company that is where a flag targets are required. And then, of course, there are the companies that would, so in the point A here would obviously fall under flag sector guidance. So of course, the forest paper products, food production, animal source, food and bev, processing, food and staples, tobacco. So these are the companies where a flag target would also be required. And so there are some, grace period available for flag companies. So this is quite common when SBTi introduce new sector guidance. You don't have to immediately, comply. So here you see the chart. If you're a flag company, so basically if you fall under the condition in this gray box here, and if you're setting science-based target for the first time, or if you're updating science-based targets or adding net zero targets from April 30th, 2023 onward, flag targets would be required, and then you need to use the greenhouse gas protocol land sector guidance and the draft version of it. And if you already have validated science-based targets, so it's only recommended. However, when we have the final version of that GHGP protocol land sector guidance, and 6 months after that, so flag targets would be required for all of the companies in this gray box. So just something to keep in mind. I think we have some chats. Let's see.
Yeah, we do have a couple of questions in the
Yes.
chat. Thank you for them. You're also welcome to use the Q&A function.
Yeah, I think these are not flag specific, so I will cover flag first.
Yes, let's just wait with these questions for the very end.
Yes, so here you see that these are the flag-related emissions that are detailed in the GHGP guidance. So what are the category of land related emissions that you have to account for? So there's the land use change, so from like deforestation activities, from land management, and also the removals and storage activities. So these are the carbon removal activities that you would need to account for separately. So on the flag guidance itself, so these are where you need to go to look for the target setting methodologies. So SBTi has developed this flag specific guidance. So you do have to use that guidance to set your targets. And then there are, some relevant criteria. So for the target boundary, your targets have to meet the target boundary for scope 1 and scope 3 separately. So for scope 1, so if you have flag related emissions in scope 1, you have to cover 95% of that flag emissions. And then for scope 3, you have to cover 67% of that flag emissions alone. So you're not looking at your whole scope 3 scope 3 inventory. Now you have to look at the flag and non-flag related emissions and be able to cover the 95%, the 67% of each. So you have to meet that target boundary each. And if you have commodities that fall under the 11 commodity pathways, so I have them written here, beef, chicken, dairy, leather, etc. You can use those commodity pathways as well. But just to note that the use of most of the commodity pathways is optional, other than for companies in the forest and paper product sector. Or if you have emissions related to timber and wood fiber, that is more than 10% of your total flag emissions. And then you need to use that timber and wood and fiber pathway.
Chandan, we have actually a question related to those commodity pathways from Timmy, who's asking, would cotton be considered a source for flag emissions? And actually, that's actually a question that I also had, because I was wondering why cotton is not there. Is that because of the apparel sector guidance, or do you have an answer for that?
I think this is a question where we would need Paula. Is Paula still there?
Yes. Hi everyone. Yeah, to be honest, it's not that it's not relevant. I think it's just that when the SBTi flag team was developing the commodity approach, they have better information for the commodities that are currently covered. However, there might be an expansion to other commodities in the future. So it might be just data availability.
Right. Thanks so much, Paula. It would make sense for the flag guidance to cover cotton as well, but for now it's not in there. Sorry that we can't elaborate more on this, Timmy, but thank you so much for the question.
I think for that, there's also a very helpful resource, maybe you're already aware of it, is the Hague Index. So there you might be able to find a lot of data around conventional cotton and organic cotton, and then the emissions factor for each specifically. But yeah, so this is just something that could be useful. Okay, so this is then the last topic we have for the received questions. So there's the voluntary target updates. So the question was, how does target update process differ from target setting process? How long does it take? Is it lighter? So it would be lighter, of course, than the full validation process. And in the contract or in this updated validation service offering document that we have linked here, it describes that results are delivered within 30 business days. But I would just keep in mind that, in your planning, just to reserve a bit more time so that you have more leeway. And there was a question about, we have already approved well below 2-degree targets, and we want to upgrade our near-term targets to be 1.5-degree aligned. So I think the company is more sure about the ambition. They want to update their Scope 1 and 2 target too, but not still deciding on Scope 3. Can they submit targets separately for update, or do they need to submit all commitments? I believe that if you do separate the targets separately, submit the targets separately for update, I think you might have to pay for extra fees, because then you would have to go through the update process twice. And just to keep in mind, the time and the extra costs that might come with it. So I would encourage to submit an update all at once together. So should we answer some of the questions in the Q&A?
Yes. Thank you so much, Chandan. The Q&A is quite empty, but but we have some questions in the chat. Thank you so much for posting them. I can see that Paula has already answered one of them, but we have two more questions. The first related to the target commitment removed. One of the participants came across some cases of SBTi targets where the commitment is removed. Under what circumstances does this happen is the question. What qualifies a commitment removal?
I think that it usually, it happens when you have, passed that 2-year, time limit you have. So you have 24-month you know, from the time you submit your commitment to submit targets. So if you pass that time, and I don't know if there's still like a grace period given, because usually SBTi doesn't, remove it immediately. They might contact you a bit beforehand to let you know that your time is coming up. Or if you pass the time, they might offer an additional few months for you.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, and also we had a specific case where many companies joined what we call the Business Ambition for 1.5 campaign, and the SBTi recently released a report, which it was sort of the end of that campaign. Anyway, a lot of companies committed to net zero as part of that campaign, and some of these companies failed to send in targets for validation within the 2-year period, as you also mentioned, Chendan. And that is the reason why a lot of companies, or at least a very good handful, quite a lot of companies got their commitments removed. That doesn't mean that they can't achieve the status of committed again if they send in the targets, but they have to sort of start over, and that's why you see that tag on the website. We did have a case in Denmark where I think it was 8 or 9 big companies got their commitments removed, and it did get some media attention, but it's not too late for these companies to join to join again and commit to net zero again.
Yes. And Paula has also pasted a link to the commitment compliance policy, where it would, give you a lot of details on, what happens if your commitment is about to expire or if it expires. So the next question is there a need for time series? Do the calculations emissions data need to go back X years? Is assurance required for the emissions calculations? So it does not have to go back. Actually, the most recommended is to use the most recent inventory, because that's, of course, reflects the most recent emissions of the company, and the data quality is likely to be better. And I think that you can still go back, but not earlier than 2015, right? Is that, Paula? I think that's maybe the latest. So you cannot go back too much. Okay, so no earlier than 2015. But you must always submit your most recent inventory. So even if your target year is, let's say, 2018, you must not only submit your 2018 inventory, but also your most recent inventory, because SBTi use that to also assess how much progress you've made since that base year. Is assurance required? I believe it was optional. Is that now changed? I think third party verification used to be optional.
I think it still
It
is.
is still
It's still optional. Okay.
correct. It is still optional. SBTi is still working on MRV, and there might be recommendations in the future to verify, for example, base year inventories, and when the company has reached the target year, and to basically make claims of target achievement. There might be some considerations coming, but for the time being, there's no verification required, only recommended.
Great, thank you.
And then companies also need to be mindful of CSRD and when reporting on the ESRS E1 standard, that there need to be some level of assurance at some point. So companies can't keep not having their climate accounting not assured, at least not if they want to live up to CSRD.
Yes. Yeah, so this question on the rented offices, Paula already helped respond, but maybe we can talk about it just so that maybe it'd be helpful for other participants. Would it be okay to estimate Scope 1 and 2 emissions for rented locations around the world with average generic emissions factors, and then only have specific activity-based Scope 1 and 2 data from the headquarter? And what if you do not have Scope 3 data from rented locations? Is it okay to use only HQ data, or do you also need to make estimation? Yeah, so as Paula's explained, you can have a mix of different data quality, like the best you can get for that location. But you should be like clear, also just internally, like, what kind of data quality you used in this category, because it might be helpful for the future if you want to, be able to obtain better data sources. So then there was a follow-up question: is it better to estimate in the same way for all rented out locations, or to use available data from locations, which is however uncertain, data sources? Yeah, so yeah, as Paula explained, if you do have the local emission factors, that's of course preferred than a global average. And it's again something you should determine yourself internally, what is the best to use. But I think I would agree that to use the local emissions factors would be preferred. And another question also: does the company need to make an estimate on Scope 3 categories that are considered material, but the company is not focusing on those at the moment? Can those categories left blank, or is an estimate needed? Yes, so you need to submit a complete Scope 3 inventory. So even if you use estimates for a certain category, you have to make sure it is there and that it's complete. And if it's material, I think that you could make plans to improve that data quality. I think nowadays there are a lot of resources available, also a lot of emissions audit software available that could maybe support you to improve the data and also facilitate any engagement with suppliers to get that data if needed. Yes, so that's all of the questions. Is there any other question?
Yeah, thank you, Chendan, for answering all of these very different questions, but very, very good questions. Thank you for all who submitted questions. If there is a last question or a last couple of questions, now it's the time. Is the time to post them. You will, of course, also get the chance to post some questions in the next session in October. But if you have anything related to what we've been discussing today, now is the time. You always also feel free to raise your hand if you want to speak up. That's also an opportunity.
Yes.
And of course, just to remind you all that you will receive these slide decks. Now, usually in the online Excel sheet, we usually post the questions to each answer in the Excel sheet. But in this case, Chendan and 21 Holistic have been so kind to post the answers in the slide deck, so you have everything at the same in the same place, and also these explanations and references to SBTi guidance and criteria, which is very helpful. I don't see any questions, so I just want to say thank you so much, Chendan. We have a comment about the white paper regarding scope about category 11. Yes, we will be sharing that white paper, and we will also briefly go through them before we end today's session. But Chendan, thank you so much for taking us through all of the different, sometimes very complex criteria and guidance on SBTi. I'm sure that all of the participants found it very, very, very helpful. So thank you, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
And for the rest of the participants, I will hand the word over to my colleague Thomas from the Norwegian network, who's running this advanced track with me. So because we will soon be going into breakout rooms.
Thank you, Joachim. I was just wondering if you wanted to say a few words about the slide previous here. Sorry, I'm going the wrong way. This one.
Yes, that's a very good idea to take that first before we go into breakout rooms. We just wanted you to know it's sort of a service message from the SBTi in case you are already in the process of submitting targets. Please note that the SBTi will be pausing all new validation bookings for 1 month, and that is to accommodate a new SBTi validation portal, which will be launching at the end of October. And that's actually a very, very good development because this portal will allow companies to check their target submission status, to access historic submissions and validation reports, and also, will generally help streamline the process and communications between the SBTi and the companies that are submitting the targets. And so the 4-week pause to all new validation bookings will start on Tuesday, October 1st already. So if you are on the verge of submitting targets, we suggest that you do it now, or at least be mindful that you have to wait a bit of time. Thankfully, companies with commitments expiring between October and December will be given a month-long commitment extension. So if you are at the end of that 2-year commitment period, you will get a month more to submit your targets. I think that's a very important note if you are just about to meet your deadline. I think that's all.
Thanks, Joachim. Right, like mentioned, we're going to go out into breakout rooms. We'll split you up automatically, like we did last time. Just a couple of points on best practice. If there are more than one of you from each company, please assign one as a group lead. Sorry, one in the entire room to be the group lead and timekeeper, so that we go through the questions which we'll share with you. You'll have 30 minutes to do that. So the group lead can moderate the question and make sure everybody's included and participates, and then keep the time. You'll get a message when it's 1 minute left, and we'll automatically bring you back to the common room as well. Should you need any help or assistance, please let us know. I think one of us from the Global Compact will be in each room as well. Please stay engaged. This is the key part of this program, is for you to interact with people or peers who have the same issues, and obviously respect each other as we all do normally. So like I said, 30 minutes. If you haven't met each other before in the rooms, please do introduce yourself shortly. And the 2 questions we're posing today is the first one. So what are the main challenges you're facing regarding setting science-based targets today? And then also if you learned something new today that you would like to explore further. We'll post those questions in the chat as well, so you each have them. Like I say, we'll kick you out into the rooms automatically, and we'll bring you back automatically as well. So I think we can then split up into the groups. If Silla, you can do that for me, thank you very much. Okay, guys, welcome back. I hope you had some interesting discussions. Certainly some in the group that I was in. So we're about nearing the end for today, but just to go over a few next steps with you. So the most important thing right now is to remember to submit your questions for the Net Zero Q&A session, which we will have on the 9th of October. You do that in the Q&A sheets that we sent already, and you will be sent this afterwards as well. The deadline to submit those questions is the 1st of October, so next week. Please do that. And upcoming, like I said, the next workshop will be the one on the 9th of October on setting net zero targets. Be the same kind of sessions as today. We also have SBTi sector-specific Q&A sessions that are organized on the 10th to the 22nd of October. I have some more information on that later. Those are optional if you want to participate, but please do. We have good experience with those. Those are globally run as well. And also on the 24th of October, we will have an SBTi practical exercise session. That is also optional for those of you in this group, the advanced and advanced net zero participants. But should you wish to participate, you should sign up via the link that you'll get sent as well. And as in the previous instances, the answers to your questions today, you'll get those afterwards. Like Joachim mentioned, Holistic 21 has been nice enough to put the questions directly in the slides with the answers connected. So that's quite well. And as also always, we also ask you to answer our feedback survey, as that will help us improve the sessions to ensure that you get the most out of it. And just in case you want to participate in the optional exercise on the 24th, on the Academy, there are some pre-read material for those exercises. And there's also a sign-up link for that as well. And these are just some resources that might be interesting to look at before the practical exercise, should you choose to participate in that. And as I mentioned, we will conduct globally run SBTi sector exchanges on the three sectors flag on October 10th, financial institutions October 15th, and on the building sector on October 22nd. You will have to register in advance for those using the links that you see here and that you'll be sent. And then you'll get the proper link for the individual sessions. Like I said, those are globally run and they're co-organized with the SBTi itself. So we do encourage you to participate if that's of interest to you and if you are in those sectors.
And I think, Thomas, that for some of for at least two of the sessions, there are two options. So I think there's a morning session and an afternoon session. So maybe we should have we'll make sure to put in links for those two sessions. I think for the only one is flag. There's this flag session is only one.
Yeah, that's right. These are the ones that kind of fit the European timings. We'll add the other ones as well. I think they're quite early or either quite late. I don't remember. But we'll be sure to put those in for you. Good point, Joachim. And just a couple of additional resources that you can use that's relevant for today's sessions. These are SBTi specific guidance. You'll get those links as well. And then the final point, which Joachim also mentioned, earlier this year, we published some Nordic business briefs on science-based climate action related themes. So 3 of them, which are available here for you to peruse and download at your leisure. So the first one was on the product durability and lifetime emissions dilemmas. Second, on supplier engagement to cut emissions and increase adoption of greener materials. And the final one was on science-based targets for forest, land, and agriculture sectors. So those are available for you to look at as well. And I think that wraps up the sessions today. Please feel free to raise your hand if you have any questions. At the moment, I can't see you, so if there are any questions, now you can probably see yourself. I don't see any hands or questions. And if that's the case, as always, feel free to reach out to any one of us in the team from your country. We're happy to answer your questions and help you along. And if nothing else, then I wish everybody a further nice day, and thank you for participating today. And we look forward to seeing you in the next session. Now there is something in the chat. Okay, thank you. Well, thank you guys. We'll see you next time.